Hello, everyone. My name is Reagan Dishaw, and today we're going to be looking at the relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels. I'm a senior at Michigan State University, and I am in Dr. Becker's Public Health Advanced Nutrition class. And this semester, my classmates and we designed a cross-sectional study looking at the relationship between blood pressure and BMI across a young adult population. And then I personally looked at the relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels of that population. And so that's what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to start off with some background information, relevance, and gaps in the literature. And then I'll talk about my research contribution and my hypothesis. And then I'll go into my methods on how I conducted this research. I'll show you my results, and then we'll go into a quick discussion of it all. So for some background information, it's widely known that fruit and vegetable consumption leads to improved health, physical health for sure, but does it affect mental health is the question. So fruits and vegetables have many vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber that have proven over and over again to protect against heart disease, cancer, and obesity. Some specific findings that I found include a study where participants eating leafy greens reduced their risk of type 2 diabetes by 14%. And then another finding was a meta-analysis stating that high fruit and vegetable consumption led to a decrease in more than 7 chronic diseases. So how does this all play into the real world problem of mental health? Well, some 3 statistics that I found interesting were that almost half, 46%, of adults in the US will experience a mental illness in their lifetime. 3/4 of those cases will happen at the age of 24. And then in the year of 2018, only 41% of people with a mental illness received the professional help that they needed. So there have been many studies done before on this topic, looking at fruit and vegetable consumptions and stress and depression levels. So some studies that I found were a systematic review done in 2020 and then a cross-sectional study done in 2018, both looking at fruit and vegetable consumption and mental health states. The systematic review concluded that a higher intake of fruit and vegetables seems to have a positive effect on mental well-being. And then the cross-sectional study proved that higher raw fruit and vegetable intakes yielded higher reports of positive mood, life satisfaction, and flourishing, opposed to anxiety, depression, and negative mood. So some gaps in the current literature are what fruits and vegetables cause what mental states. It's hard for scientists to decide exactly what fruits and vegetables correlate with what mental states because it's hard to look at those effects separate from each other. And then it's also hard to state anything conclusively because mental states are subjective. So for my research contribution, this is important because I'm looking at a college-age population where I can also control for different fruit and vegetable subgroups. And then this is also contributing the mental health states of our population and how those fruit and vegetable subgroups correlate with those mental health states. So the question here is there a relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels between college-age males and females attending a major university? The hypothesis is yes, there is an inverse relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels. The more fruits and vegetables that are consumed, the lower the stress levels are going to be, and vice versa. So as for the methods, the students in my class, my classmates and I, like I said, we designed a cross-sectional study composed of 31 questions investigating the relationship between BMI, blood pressure, and different lifestyle habits. Data was collected from 206 individuals living in Ingham County, ranging from ages 17 to 27. And the survey included 2 blood pressure takings and a self-reported height and weight. Each student in my class, we surveyed 10 or more of our own participants, And then that survey was taken either over email, or the participant printed off the survey and then gave it back to the surveyor. My classmates and I, we took systolic and diastolic blood pressures twice of all of our participants, and then took the average of those blood pressures. And the instruments used to do that were a blood pressure meter and a stethoscope. And then as far as the actual 31 questions, the ones that I personally pinpointed were questions 19, 28, and 30. So question 19 is, how often do you consume the following foods? Mark one box with an X that best fits for each category of food. And it has 4 different categories of vegetables and 2 different categories of fruit. And then questions 28 and 30 are, in the last week, how often have you felt stressed? And during the past week, how often have you felt sad or even depressed? And the answers are ranging from less than 1 day per week up to every day. All of the student survey data was then compiled into one Excel document. I personally used 2 different statistical softwares to analyze these relationships. I used SAS and SPSS. I used chi-square tests and t-tests to compile a demographic frequency table. And then I also used crosstabs, which is a part of SPSS, to look at the proportions of fruit and vegetable intake and stress and depression levels. And then I also created some frequency tables within SPSS and SAS to make some different bar graphs to depict the information. So that was just how I personally analyzed all of the relationships. So we'll start off with my demographics frequency table. We are looking at, so the demographics that we're looking at are race, job status, family income, and years of age. And then it's separated by males and females. I provided the male means, the female means, the overall mean, and then the standard deviations. And then here I pointed out where the most frequent demographics were. So the most frequent demographics in our population are the ethnicity of white, being part-time employed, having a family income of over $100,000, and being 21 years of age. So first I ran 2 chi-square tests in SAS, comparing the relationship between whole fruit consumption and stress levels and depression levels. So looking at the p-value of the chi-square tests, neither of them were significant. The first one was 0.31 and then 0.124. So there is no detectable relationship, but the information here is still good information. And we can see that the lighter the colors, the less depressive the states, or the less stressful the states. And you can see that over here, there are plenty of individuals with less depressive states, where over here on the stressful side, you can see lots of stress, lots of darker colors all across the board. So that was just interesting to me, that there is definitely more prevalence of stress than depression within our population. The next thing I did was I went on SPSS and I looked at some frequency statistics. I looked at fruit and vegetable intake frequencies, and our categories here are leafy greens, red and orange vegetables, and whole fruits. And then down here we have our weekly intake. So you can see that red and orange vegetables are our most popular overall. And then for red and orange vegetables, 1 to 2 days per week is the most popular frequency intake. And that's for red and orange vegetables specifically. Whereas 3 to 4 days per week is the most popular intake on average, considering these 3 categories. So 3 to 4 days per week is the most popular intake of fruits and vegetables across our population. Next, in SPSS, I ran some chi-squares analyses comparing everyday leafy green consumption and stress levels, less than everyday leafy green consumption and depression levels, red and orange vegetable consumption and stress levels, and bean and pea consumption and depression levels. And then I controlled for gender. So before I controlled for gender, there were no detectable relationships. But then after I controlled for males and females, I was able to find a significant relationship between red and orange vegetable intake and stress levels within the male population. And then I was also able to find a significant relationship between less than everyday leafy green consumption and depression levels among the female population. So those were two significant results that I was able to find. But it's also important to note that there's possibly type 2 errors within this information. So all of these results being insignificant could very possibly be type 2 errors, which is when there is a significant relationship, but the statistics don't show it. And that is possibly from our sample sizes being pretty small. And then lastly, I looked at the average vegetable intake compared with average stress and depression levels. I took the stress question and the depression question and took the average of it. And then I took the 4 vegetable categories: starches, beans and peas, red and orange, and leafy greens, and took the average of those and then compared the average of both categories and compiled this table. I had much more results, but just for simplicity reasons, I compiled it into a smaller table. And after running a chi-square test, I was able to find a significant relationship. The p-value here is 0.009. So we can conclude that there is a significant relationship between average vegetable intake and average stress and depression levels. So that leads us into our discussion. So like I just said, there is a possibility of type 2 errors within our information. And so it's always possible, or it's always a good idea to consider if a type 1 or a type 2 error is possible within the data that you're looking at. And then another thing is we can conclude that there is average vegetable intake and average sadness levels do show a significant correlation. We did find that within the research. Another thing is 3 to 4 days per week is the most average fruit and vegetable intake consumption frequency, 3 to 4 days per week. Another thing is controlling for males and females can affect the data. Controlling for anything can affect the data. So that's something to always consider when you're looking at your research. After I controlled for males and females, red and orange vegetables and stress had more of a correlation in males, and then leafy green vegetables and depression had more of a correlation in females. And then lastly, we're going to look at, was the research question answered? So we can revisit the question, which was, is there a relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels between college-age males and females attending a major university? And after all of the results, we can conclude that yes, there is a relationship between fruit and vegetable consumption and stress and depression levels within our population. So what do the results mean? Well, we now know that fruit and vegetables have a positive impact on not only physical health, but mental and emotional well-being as well. And then going forward, fruit and vegetable intakes should be encouraged by primary care physicians regularly. Considering how relevant mental health issues are now and how many people were not receiving the professional help that they need, it's important to emphasize and encourage fruit and vegetables into everyone's diet. And that can start with primary care physicians. And going along with that is fruit and vegetables should be implemented into the diet, not only to maintain, but to unfold a new, meaningful lifestyle. And that is why fruit and vegetable consumption is very, very important. And so thank you for listening to my research. Have a great day.